What happens when a millionaire gets stood up on a blind date on Christmas Eve, and the only person who notices his loneliness is a bright-eyed, sharp-tongued waitress? Miles Carter had everything, except someone to look at when the world stood still. But when Wendy approached that empty table, with a teasing smile and a boldness he'd never encountered before, something stirred inside him. She didn't see his bank account. She saw his bare soul. And that night, under twinkling lights and unspoken promises, two hearts began a dangerous game, where every touch, every whispered word, every desire-laden glance would lead them into unknown and irreversible territory. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the super thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing stories that move you. The Elmstone breathed Christmas through every crack. Pine garlands and golden lights framed the windows, fogged by the snow falling outside, while the aroma of cinnamon, mulled wine and roasts filled the air with a promise of comfort that Miles Carter couldn't feel. The restaurant buzzed with the festive energy of Christmas Eve in Boston, couples leaning over intimate tables, families laughing loudly, glasses clinking in toasts celebrating love, togetherness, belonging. Everything Miles didn't have. He sat alone at a table for two in the most discreet corner of the room, staring at an empty chair as if it might, at any moment, materialize the person who was supposed to be there. His 7th blind date attempt. 7th. The number echoed in his mind like a sentence. 7 women who had agreed to meet him. 7 kindled hopes. 7 disappointments. But this one hurt differently. Because there wasn't even the courtesy of a cancellation text. Just the cruel silence of the phone he checked every 30 seconds, and the empty chair that seemed to mock him. Miles picked up his glass of red wine and swirled it slowly between his fingers, watching the ruby liquid dance under the candlelight. He was a man used to solving problems, to building empires with code and strategy. At 34, his tech company was worth millions. His bank account had more zeros than he could spend, and his apartment overlooking the Charles River was the envy of many. But none of that warmed the emptiness growing inside him like a winter storm. The noise around him was deafening in its collective happiness. A child giggled as her father pretended to steal a piece of her cake. An elderly couple held hands across the table, fingers intertwined with the familiarity of decades. Nearby, a man knelt down, opening a velvet box as his girlfriend brought her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down. Miles looked away, feeling something bitter rise in his throat. It wasn't envy, it was something worse, as it was the growing certainty that maybe he wasn't made for this, to be chosen, to be loved. He had tried. God, how he had tried. Dating apps, social events, introductions from well-meaning friends. But it always ended the same way. Women interested in his wallet, his status, the doors he could open. Never in him. Never in the man who woke up at 3 in the morning with crazy ideas, who collected vintage jazz records, who had an irrational fear of elevators, who loved mint chocolate chip ice cream even in the depths of winter. Nobody wanted to know that Miles. And maybe, he thought bitterly, that Miles wasn't worth knowing. The snow outside was falling harder now, turning Boston into a perfect postcard. But to Miles, it just seemed cold, distant, like everything in his life lately. That's when he saw her. She crossed the room with a tray balanced in one hand, weaving between tables and chairs with the natural grace of someone who knew every inch of that space. Brown hair pulled into a messy bun, a few rebellious strands escaping and framing a face that radiated an energy different from everything around her. She wore the restaurant's standard black and white uniform, but there was something about her that defied formality. Maybe it was the Christmas bell earrings that swayed with every movement, or the red lipstick that seemed like a declaration of war against monotony. But it was the smile. That smile she offered customers wasn't mechanical or rehearsed. It was genuine, lighting up her face in a way that made something tighten in Miles's chest. She approached his table, and Miles noticed her eyes were light brown, almost golden under the candlelight, eyes that seemed to see too much. "So," she said, her voice carrying a tone of good-natured humor as she looked at the empty chair, "let me guess. She had a last-minute emergency? Impossible traffic? Or simply decided that Christmas Eve deserved something better than, well, this? Miles blinked, completely disarmed by her frankness. Most servers would pretend not to notice, offer a polite smile and disappear. But she was standing there beside the table with one eyebrow arched and a half-smile that was part amusement, part compassion. "No emergency that I know of," Miles replied, surprised by his own honesty. "Just silence." "Ah." She shook her head, making the bells on her earrings jingle softly. "Christmas ghost, the worst kind. At least a cancellation has the decency of a bad explanation. Silence is just cruel." There was something in the way she said it, without pity, without judgment, just recognition, that made Miles release the breath he didn't know he was holding. "Seventh time," he confessed, not knowing why he was sharing this with a stranger. "Seventh?" She whistled softly, impressed. "Okay, you're either extremely optimistic or a masochist. Haven't decided which yet." Miles couldn't help it. He smiled, a small, crooked smile, but real, the first in weeks. She noticed. Her eyes sparkled with something that looked like quiet victory. "Wendy," she said, extending her hand, "and before you ask, yes, I monitor my customers. It's like a superpower of mine. I detect loneliness from miles away." He took her hand, and the grip was firm, warm. Miles. Miles. She tested the name as if tasting a new wine. Solid name, reliable, like someone who pays taxes on time and never forgets birthdays. Guilty on both counts. Perfect. Now Miles, who pays his taxes and got stood up on Christmas Eve, let me ask you a serious question. She leaned in slightly closer, and Miles caught her scent, something soft, between vanilla and fresh pine, mixed with a hint of coffee. "Are you going to spend this beautiful night staring at that empty chair and letting these happy couples win? Or are you going to order the best thing on the menu and let me make you laugh until you forget today was supposed to be terrible?" Miles's breath caught for a second. She was so close he could see a small scar above her left eyebrow, could count the soft freckles dotting her cheeks. And her eyes. Those golden eyes staring at him with a mix of challenge and sweetness he'd never seen before. He started, but his voice failed. "It's a yes or no question, Miles, and just so you know, the right answer is yes." He took a deep breath, feeling something begin to thaw inside him, something that had frozen a long time ago. Yes. Her smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Great choice. Now do you trust me?" And strangely, surprisingly, he did. Wendy returned a few minutes later with a confidence that made it seem like she owned the place, not just a waitress. She carried a basket of warm bread and herb butter, setting it on the table with a dramatic flourish that pulled another involuntary smile from Miles. "First rule for surviving disastrous dates," she announced, sitting down in the empty chair as if she'd been invited, which technically she hadn't been, but Miles found he didn't mind one bit. "Carbs. Always start with carbs. They absorb disappointment." Miles grabbed a piece of bread, still steaming, and the texture, crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, was almost too comforting. "Is that a life philosophy or just culinary advice?" "Both. I'm deep like that." Wendy winked, taking a piece for herself and spreading butter with practical movements. "So, Miles, tell me, what's a clearly successful guy who can get a reservation at the Elmstone on Christmas Eve, which, by the way, is practically impossible, doing on blind dates?" There was something about the way she asked, direct but without malice, that disarmed Miles's carefully constructed defenses. He chewed slowly, thinking about his answer. "Honestly, because apparently I'm terrible at meeting people organically." He laughed without humor. "My life is work, meetings, more work. And when I try to meet someone, I don't know. It feels like there's always an invisible wall between me and the rest of the world." Wendy watched him for a long moment, her head slightly tilted, eyes narrowed as if reading between the lines of what he wasn't saying. "Let me guess. They find out how much money you have and suddenly get very interested in who you know, where you can take them, what doors you can open." Miles froze, the bread halfway to his mouth. "How did you—" "Please. I've worked at fancy restaurants for 5 years. I recognize the signs." She gestured vaguely toward the dining room. Expensive but understated watch, tailored but not flashy suit, posture of someone used to commanding boardrooms. You have money, Miles, and people without character can smell money like sharks smell blood in the water. He should feel exposed, vulnerable, but something about her frankness was freeing. So you can smell it too, he teased, raising an eyebrow. Wendy burst into genuine laughter that made a few heads turn. Honey, I make $15 an hour plus tips. Trust me, your money doesn't impress me. But this? She pointed at his face. That crooked smile you try to hide when you think you've said something funny, that's interesting. Miles felt heat rise up his neck. Nobody, absolutely nobody, had ever noticed that before. He didn't even know he did it. I don't. You do. Left corner of your mouth goes up first, then you try to correct it, like smiling is some kind of corporate weakness. Wendy leaned across the table, resting her chin on her hand, eyes sparkling with amusement. It's adorable, actually, like a CEO trying to be human. I am human, Miles protested, but he was smiling, that damn crooked smile. I'm starting to believe it. She grabbed another piece of bread, but her eyes never left his. So, tell me about the other 6 disasters. Must be some good stories there. And so, between pieces of bread and increasingly frequent laughter, Miles found himself telling stories that would normally embarrass him. The woman who spent the entire dinner texting someone else. The one who ordered the most expensive thing on the menu and then forgot her wallet. The one who revealed between appetizer and main course that she was married and just wanted to see what she was missing. Wendy listened to it all with expressions that ranged from shocked to amused to genuinely outraged. Wait, she was married? Wendy slapped her hand on the table hard enough to make the silverware rattle, and had the audacity to tell you in the middle of dinner. What kind of... Exactly what I thought, Miles interrupted, laughing hard now. I paid the bill and left before dessert. You should have thrown the wine at her. I thought about it. But it was a 2015 Bordeaux. Would have been a waste. Wendy laughed so loud she had to cover her mouth with her hands. Okay, you have very strange priorities, but I respect it. It was in that moment that Miles really looked at her. Not just glanced, looked. The way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she really laughed. How she gestured with her hands when she spoke, expressive and unfiltered. How there was a sharp intelligence behind the humor, a genuine empathy she tried to disguise with sarcasm. She was magnetic, like a fire in a cold room, impossible to ignore. What about you? Miles found himself asking, genuinely curious. What's your romantic disaster story? Everyone has one. Something shifted in Wendy's face, just for a second, a shadow passing through her eyes before she shrugged with a lightness that seemed rehearsed. Oh, I have a whole collection, but tonight isn't about me. It's about turning your Christmas Eve from tragedy into, well, something less horrible. She stood up, but before leaving, she placed her hand over Miles's, just for an instant, her fingers warm against his skin. It was a quick touch, almost casual, but it sent a wave of electricity up Miles's arm that took his breath away. I'll be back in 5 minutes with the best dish in this restaurant. And Miles? She leaned in, so close he could feel the warmth of her breath. You deserve someone who shows up, who stays, who really sees you. Don't give up yet, okay? And then she was gone, leaving Miles sitting there with his heart beating in a strange new rhythm, his hand still tingling where she'd touched it, and something dangerous beginning to bloom in his chest. Hope. Around him, the restaurant continued its noisy Christmas celebration. But for the first time that night, for the first time in months, Miles didn't feel alone. He felt seen, and it was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. He looked at the chair where Wendy had sat, still feeling the warmth of her presence, and realized with surprising clarity this woman had just changed something fundamental inside him, something he didn't even know was broken until she started fixing it with nothing but sharp words, sweet eyes and a touch that lasted only a second, but it was enough. Wendy returned exactly 5 minutes later, as promised, carrying a plate that gave off an aroma so irresistible it made Miles's stomach growl embarrassingly. She smiled at the sound, placing the plate before him with an exaggerated comical bow that pulled a laugh from him. I present to you cheese ravioli with sage and golden butter sauce, finished with freshly grated parmesan and a touch of Sicilian lemon. She spoke like a cooking show host, her voice dramatic and her hands making elaborate gestures, also known as emotional therapy in pasta form. Miles looked at the plate, each ravioli perfectly arranged, the golden sauce glistening under the candlelight, the aroma of sage and butter filling his senses. It looked like edible art. "This seems too expensive for someone who got stood up on Christmas Eve," Wendy interrupted, sitting down again in the chair across from him as if she belonged there. "Please, consider it on the house, or better yet, on me. Because cheese, Miles, cheese heals everything. It's science." "I'm not sure that's exactly how science works." "Are you a scientist?" "No, but then trust me. I'm an expert in broken hearts and comfort carbs." She grabbed a fork and speared a ravioli from his plate without ceremony, bringing it to her mouth and closing her eyes with a satisfied moan. "See? Absolute perfection." Miles should be indignant that she just stole food from his plate. Should remember that she was a stranger, that all of this was deeply inappropriate, that he had carefully established rules and boundaries for social interactions. But instead he found himself laughing, a real deep laugh that came from somewhere inside him that had been forgotten for too long. "Do you always steal food from customers? Only from the ones who look like they need to learn how to share?" Wendy winked, pushing the plate back toward him. "Now eat, and tell me more about this tech empire you built, because I have a feeling you're more interesting than you let on." As Miles ate, and my God, she was right, the ravioli was transcendent, he found himself talking about things he normally kept tucked away, about how he started the company in a friend's garage, about the sleepless nights writing code, about the terrifying and thrilling moment when they landed their first big investment. Wendy listened with an attention that went beyond politeness. She asked smart questions, connected dots he hadn't even explicitly mentioned, challenged some of his assumptions with a fresh perspective. "So, you created software that helps small businesses manage inventory?" she asked, eyes bright with genuine interest. "Oversimplifying, yes, but the idea is to democratize tools that only big corporations could afford before." "That's actually really cool." Wendy leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Like you're not just making money, you're actually helping people." Miles felt something tighten in his chest at the recognition. "I try. It's not always easy to balance profit with purpose, but you try. And that matters." She held his gaze for a moment too long to be casual, and Miles felt the air between them shift, become thicker, more charged. A server rushed past, calling Wendy's name with clear urgency. She rolled her eyes but stood up. "Duty calls, but don't go anywhere, okay? We still have dessert to discuss." "Wasn't planning on it," Miles replied, and realized it was true. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, he was exactly where he wanted to be. While Wendy worked, Miles watched her discreetly across the room. The way she moved with graceful efficiency between tables, how her face lit up talking to a small child, how she gently mediated an argument between a couple at a nearby table with humor and tact. She wasn't just good at her job, she cared, genuinely. And that was rare, precious. 20 minutes later, she returned with 2 wine glasses and a plate of tiramisu, sitting down with a dramatic sigh. "Okay, official break. My supervisor can sue me, but you seem like the kind of person who appreciates good dessert. You're going to get in trouble because of me? Honey, if there's one night to break a few rules, it's Christmas Eve." Wendy pushed a glass toward him. "Besides, Greg, my supervisor, has a soft spot for romantic stories. If he complains, I'll just tell him I'm rescuing a broken heart." "Is that what you're doing?" Miles asked quietly, picking up the glass. Wendy was quiet for a moment, the playful humor disappearing from her face, replaced by something softer, more real. "I think so. Or maybe you're rescuing mine. Haven't decided yet." Before Miles could process the weight of that confession, she clinked her glass against his with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "To disastrous dates that lead us to unexpected places." "To unexpected places," Miles echoed, and they drank. The wine was sweet and full-bodied, the tiramisu a perfect combination of bitter coffee and smooth cream. But what Miles really savored was the conversation, the way Wendy talked about her family with fierce and exasperated love, about her dreams of one day opening her own coffee shop, about how she read 3 books a week and had strong opinions about literature that she defended passionately. Wait, you're telling me you've never read Jane Austen? Wendy stared at him with theatrical shock. Never had time to… Time? Miles, you're breaking my heart here. She placed her hand over her chest dramatically. Pride and Prejudice is mandatory. It's about people who are completely wrong for each other, who discover they're actually perfect together. She stopped abruptly, her cheeks flushing slightly. Miles smiled, that crooked smile she'd mentioned before. Sounds interesting. Maybe I should read it. You should, she murmured, looking away, her fingers playing nervously with the napkin. It was in that moment Miles noticed their fingers were inches apart on the table, so close he could see the small scars on her hands, marks of hard work, of a life lived without filters or protections. Slowly, almost without thinking, he moved his hand, his fingers brushing lightly against hers. Wendy didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her palm upward, allowing him to intertwine his fingers with hers. The touch was simple, almost chaste, but the electricity that ran between them was anything but innocent. Miles, she whispered, and there was a vulnerability in her voice he hadn't heard before. Yes? Don't let me down, okay? I know it sounds like I'm being dramatic, but you seem different, and I really need you to be different. He squeezed her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles over her skin. I could say the same about you. And there, under the twinkling Christmas lights, with the sound of laughter and celebration around them, 2 strangers held hands and silently promised to try. The night wore on, and the restaurant began to slowly empty. Families with sleepy children said their goodbyes. Couples walked hand in hand toward the exit, and the frantic energy of Christmas dinner gave way to a more intimate quiet. Miles should have left a long time ago. His reservation time had expired. His plate was empty, and technically he had no reason left to stay. But the idea of getting up from that table, walking out the door and leaving Wendy behind, seemed physically impossible. She had returned to the table 3 more times during the last hour, always with an excuse, checking if he wanted more water, asking about coffee, bringing a small dessert courtesy of the chef who insisted on sending it, though Miles suspected Wendy had made that up. Each time she appeared, she stayed a little longer, the conversation flowing with an ease that scared Miles with its naturalness. Now she was sitting again, her apron already removed, her hair loose falling in brown waves over her shoulders. Her shift had ended 15 minutes ago, but she made no move to leave. Instead, she played with one of the bells on the earring she still wore, her eyes fixed on Miles in a way that made his heart race. So, she began, biting her lower lip in a gesture Miles was beginning to recognize as nervousness disguised as casualness. What are you doing tomorrow, let me guess? Spending Christmas alone in your giant apartment, watching reruns of old movies, pretending it's just another day? Miles laughed, but the sound came out hollow. You've known me for a few hours, and you can already read my mind. It's not hard. You have that I'm used to being alone and pretend I don't care look. Wendy tilted her head, her golden eyes studying him with an intensity that left him bare. But you do care, don't you? That's why you were on blind dates. That's why you were here today, even knowing you'd probably end up disappointed again. Her brutal honesty should offend. Instead, it was freeing, like someone finally had permission to say out loud the things Miles hid from himself. I do care, he admitted quietly, his voice hoarse. I care a lot. I just don't know how to do this anymore. How to let people in. How to trust they won't leave when they find out who I really am. Wendy was silent for a long moment, her eyes softening with an understanding that went beyond sympathy. Then, she did something completely unexpected. She reached across the table and touched his face, her palm warm against the stubble, her thumb tracing a gentle line along his cheekbone. Miles, she whispered, and there was something so tender in the way she said his name that he felt his chest tighten. I've known you for exactly 3 hours and 42 minutes. And in that time you've made me laugh more than anyone has in the last 6 months. You told me about your dreams without trying to impress me. You stayed here, vulnerable, real, without corporate masks or defenses. So believe me when I say who you really are. Is someone very much worth knowing? Miles covered her hand with his, holding it against his face, his eyes closing for a moment to absorb the warmth, the connection. When he opened them again, she was looking at him with an expression that mixed fear and determination, like someone about to jump off a cliff without knowing if there's water below. "Come spend Christmas with me," she blurted out suddenly, the words coming in a nervous rush. "At my house with my family. I know it's completely crazy. We barely know each other. And my mum will probably bombard you with invasive questions, and my sister will try to challenge you at video games, and we have 3 cats who will judge you mercilessly. But," she paused, taking a deep breath, "but nobody should spend Christmas alone, especially not you, especially not after today." Miles went completely still, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. Go to her house, meet her family. This was insane. He didn't do things like this, impulsive, risky, without proper planning. He was the man who made spreadsheets for important decisions, who researched restaurants for 3 days before choosing where to eat, who never, ever jumped headfirst into unknown situations. But then he looked into her eyes, those golden eyes that sparkled with hope mixed with fear of rejection, and realized she was taking as much of a risk as he was, maybe more. Because she was opening not just her home but her life, her family, the most intimate and unprotected parts of who she was. And suddenly, the decision became the easiest thing in the world. "Yes," he heard his own voice say, firm and clear. "I'd love to." Wendy's face transformed, the fear melting away, giving way to a smile so radiant it lit up the entire table. "Really? You're not just being polite? Wendy, I spent the whole night with you. You must have figured out by now I'm not good at just being polite." He smiled, squeezing her hand. "I want to go. I want to meet your crazy family, your judgmental cats, and whatever else comes. I want to be where you are." She let out a laugh that was half relief, half euphoria, and then, before either of them could think better of it, she leaned across the table and kissed his cheek. It was a quick, chaste kiss, but it left a mark of fire on Miles's skin that he knew he'd feel for days. "Sorry," she said, pulling back with flushed cheeks. I shouldn't have—" "Don't apologize," Miles interrupted, his voice hoarse. "Never apologize for that." Wendy grabbed a napkin and a pen, quickly scribbling an address in adorably messy handwriting. "Noon! Don't be late, because my mum starts cooking at 9 in the morning and gets offended if anyone misses any part of the process." She slid the napkin across the table, her fingers lingering over Miles's for a second longer than necessary. "And Miles, wear something comfortable, no suit, just you, just me," he repeated, tucking the napkin in his pocket as if it were the most precious object in the world. When they finally stood to leave, the restaurant was almost empty. Wendy grabbed her coat from the rack, and Miles instinctively helped her put it on, his hands brushing against her shoulders. She turned, standing so close he could count every eyelash, every freckle. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying, for saying yes, for being you." "Thank you for seeing me," he replied. They walked out together into the cold Boston night, the snow still falling softly, turning the city into a giant snow globe. On the sidewalk, Wendy hesitated, then leaned in and kissed his cheek again. But this time her lips lingered, her breath warm against the cold skin. "See you tomorrow, Miles Carter." "See you tomorrow, Wendy." He watched her walk down the street, hands in her pockets, hair swaying, until she turned the corner and disappeared. And there, alone in the snow, Miles put his hand in his pocket and felt the crumpled napkin, his heart beating in a completely new rhythm, the rhythm of hope. Miles stood in front of the door of the small townhouse in Cambridge for exactly 2 minutes before finally ringing the doorbell. He had changed clothes 3 times that morning, discarding suits and dress shirts until finally settling on dark jeans, a navy blue cashmere sweater and boots. "Comfortable but presentable," he muttered to himself in the mirror, feeling ridiculously nervous like a teenager going on a first date. In his left hand, he held a carefully selected bottle of red wine, a Barolo that cost more than he'd like to admit, and in his right, a box of artisan chocolates. Safe gifts, he thought. Nothing too extravagant that would seem showy, but nothing so simple it would seem careless. The door opened before he could reconsider for the 10th time, and there was Wendy. She wore a simple red dress that fell to her knees, her hair loose in natural waves, and there was something different about her without the restaurant uniform, softer, more vulnerable, but somehow even more herself. Her eyes lit up when she saw him, and the smile that spread across her face was enough to make all of Miles's nervousness evaporate. "You came," she said, and there was genuine relief in her voice that made Miles realize she'd been nervous too. "Of course I came. I promised, didn't I?" Wendy took his hand and pulled him inside, and Miles was instantly enveloped by an explosion of warmth, delicious smells, and cheerful noise. The house was small, maybe a fifth the size of his apartment, but it overflowed with life in a way that made his place seem like a sterile mausoleum by comparison. The living room was decorated with a Christmas tree that touched the ceiling, every branch hung with an eclectic mix of ornaments, some clearly handmade by children, others vintage heirlooms, and at least a dozen golden bells that jingled softly with each breeze. White lights blinked in random rhythm. There were stockings hung by the fireplace, though Miles wasn't sure if the fireplace actually worked, and the aroma of roasting turkey, cinnamon, and something with apples filled every inch of space. "Mom!" Wendy shouted toward the kitchen. "He's here!" A woman with graying hair and a warm face appeared, wiping her hands on an apron that read, "Kiss the Cook," in faded red letters. She was an older version of Wendy. Same expressive eyes, same smile that lit up the room. "Miles!" she exclaimed, as if she'd known him for years, rushing forward and pulling him into a tight hug before he could react. "Oh, Wendy told me all about you. Welcome, dear, welcome. Do you like turkey?" "Of course you do. Everyone likes turkey. I made stuffing with chestnuts and cranberries and mashed potatoes with roasted garlic and—" "Mom, breathe," Wendy intervened, laughing. "You're going to scare him off before we even get to the living room." "Nonsense. He looks like a sturdy young man, doesn't scare easily. Do you, Miles?" Miles, still processing the surprise hug, managed to smile. "No, ma'am. And thank you for having me in your home. I brought these—" He extended the wine and chocolates. Wendy's mother, "Call me Carol, please, ma'am, makes me feel old," took the gifts with sparkling eyes. "Barolo. Oh, this boy has class, Wendy. You chose well. And Belgian chocolates. Robert, come meet Wendy's boyfriend." "He's not my boyfriend," Wendy shouted, her cheeks turning red. "Yet," she added more quietly, and Miles pretended not to hear, though his heart had sped up. A thin man with glasses appeared from the hallway, extending his hand with a gentle smile. "Robert, ignore my wife. She gets overexcited about new things. Welcome, Miles." Before Miles could respond properly, a younger girl, must have been about 20, appeared on the stairs, descending with the casual confidence of youth. She had blue-tipped dyed hair and wore a T-shirt with writing Miles couldn't fully read. "So you're the guy my sister hasn't stopped talking about since yesterday," she said, looking Miles up and down with a shameless assessment. "I expected someone more, I don't know. You seem normal." "Jade," Wendy protested. "What? It's a compliment. All your exes were complete idiots. Normal is an upgrade." Jade extended her hand to Miles. "I'm Jade, the cool sister, and just so you know, if you hurt my sister, I know where you live." "You don't know where I live," Miles pointed out, shaking her hand. "Not yet, but I have exceptional internet stalking skills." She winked, and Miles wasn't sure if she was joking. "All right, everyone out of the entryway," Carol ordered, making dramatic gestures. "Let the poor boy breathe. Miles, dear, come to the living room. Sit. Make yourself comfortable. Wendy, get him a drink. Jade, stop scaring the guests." Miles was gently pushed onto a comfortable but worn sofa, and immediately 3 cats appeared out of nowhere. A fat orange one, an elegant grey one, and a black and white one that stared at him with penetrating, judgmental yellow eyes. "These are Nacho, Phantom, and Socks," Wendy introduced, sitting next to him so close their knees touched. "They'll judge you for approximately 15 minutes before deciding if you're worthy." Nacho, the orange one, immediately jumped onto Miles's lap and began purring loudly, kneading his legs with paws that definitely had claws. "Well," Jade observed from the armchair, "Nacho never likes anyone. You must have some kind of cat magic." "Or he just wants food," Wendy murmured, but Miles noticed she was smiling. A small, intimate smile just for him. The rest of the afternoon unfolded in a wonderful confusion of conversation, laughter, and warmth. Carol kept coming out of the kitchen to check if Miles needed anything, sharing embarrassing childhood stories about Wendy that made her protest with feigned indignation. Robert, quieter but equally welcoming, talked with Miles about technology and was genuinely impressed when he found out about the company. Jade challenged him to a video game match, which Miles lost spectacularly, to everyone's great amusement. When they finally sat down at the table for dinner, Miles was hit by a wave of emotion so strong he had to blink several times to keep tears at bay. The table was crowded, golden turkey in the center, platters of potatoes, vegetables, stuffing, sauces, warm bread, all served in mismatched but clearly loved dishes. The tree lights blinked in the background, reflecting in everyone's eyes around the table. And Wendy was sitting beside him, her hand finding his under the table, fingers intertwining naturally as if they'd always belonged there. "Let's make a toast," Carol announced, raising her glass, "to new friends, new connections, and to love that finds us in the most unexpected places." "To love," everyone echoed. And when Miles looked at Wendy, she was already looking at him, eyes shining with something that took the breath from his lungs. In that moment, under the twinkling Christmas lights, surrounded by strangers who treated him like family, holding the hand of a woman who had transformed his loneliness into belonging in less than 24 hours, Miles Carter finally understood what he'd been looking for in all those disastrous dates. It wasn't perfection. It wasn't someone impressed by his money or status. It was this simple, uncomplicated acceptance, this feeling of home. The days following Christmas unfolded like a dream Miles didn't want to wake from. He and Wendy started seeing each other daily, sometimes for quick coffee between her shifts at the restaurant, other times for long walks through Boston Common while the crisp snow crunched under their feet. Each meeting was a revelation, another layer being peeled back, revealing depths Miles didn't know he craved to explore. There was a dance happening between them, subtle, charged, full of unspoken moments that hung in the air like static electricity before a storm, glances that lasted a second longer than appropriate, touches that started innocent but ended with fingers lingering, reluctant to let go. Conversations that deepened into the early morning hours, where their voices grew hoarse from talking so much, but neither wanted the night to end. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Miles showed up at the Elmstone at the end of her shift, holding 2 iced coffees even though the temperature was hovering around freezing outside. "Are you crazy?" Wendy laughed when she saw him through the window, running outside without a coat, instantly shivering in the January cold. "Who drinks iced coffee in the middle of winter?" "You mentioned you like caramel with a hint of cinnamon," Miles replied, extending one of the cups. "And apparently they only make that combination in the iced version." Wendy stood still for a moment, eyes widening as she processed what he'd said. You remembered that? I mentioned it like once, in passing 3 days ago." "I remember everything you say," Miles admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice made her heart visibly race. He could see the pulse beating at the base of her neck. She took the coffee, her fingers brushing his intentionally this time, and took a long sip. When she opened her eyes again, there was something different in them, something deeper, warmer. "You're dangerous, Miles Carter." "Dangerous how?" "Dangerous like I could get used to this and then I'd be screwed when you realize there are better people out there." Her voice was light, but he heard the real fear underneath the joke. Miles took a step closer, closing the distance between them until he could feel her warmth cutting through the winter cold. "Wendy, I spent years looking. Years. And I never found anyone who made me want to stay up until 3 in the morning just to hear one more story. No one who made me laugh the way you do. No one who looked at me like I was worth something beyond my bank balance." She swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "Miles! There are no better people. There's only you." The coffee slipped from her hand, forgotten, as she launched herself into his arms. It wasn't a delicate or hesitant embrace. It was urgent, necessary, like she needed to confirm he was real. Miles wrapped around her, burying his face in her hair that smelled like vanilla and something floral, feeling her body tremble. Not from cold, but from emotion. "Come with me," she whispered against his chest. "Let's go skating." "I don't know how to skate." Even better. 40 minutes later, Miles was desperately clinging to the edge of the ice rink at Frog Pond, his legs trembling treacherously, while Wendy glided around him with infuriating grace, laughing so loud people turned to look. "You said it was easy," he protested as his legs spread in opposite directions for the fourth time. "I lied." Wendy spun in a perfect circle, arms spread wide, face lit with pure joy. "It's fun seeing you all awkward, the big tech CEO reduced to Bambi on ice. You're mean. You adore me." She skated close, extending her hands. "Come on, trust me." Miles hesitated only a second before releasing the edge and taking her hands. She pulled him gently toward the center of the rink, guiding him patiently, while his feet tried to remember how to function. They were so close now he could see snowflakes landing on her eyelashes, could feel her warm breath contrasting with the freezing air. "Why do I feel like you're leading me to the center, just to make me fall spectacularly?" he murmured. "Because you know me well." She smiled, but there was something softer in her eyes. "But I'm also going to hold you. Promise." And then, inevitably, his feet tangled and they fell, but together a tangle of limbs and laughter, landing in an awkward heap on the ice. Wendy was on top of him, hands braced on his chest, hair falling like a curtain around them both. The laughter died slowly as their eyes met. The world, the other people skating, the children screaming, the music playing, disappeared until there was only the two of them and the infinitesimal space between their faces. "Wendy," Miles whispered, his hand coming up to touch her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek flushed from the cold. "I know," she replied, and then she was leaning in, lips inches from his. "Hey, you two, get off the middle of the rink!" They broke apart abruptly, Wendy rolling to the side, laughing hysterically as an irritated employee skated toward them. Miles helped her up, and they stumbled off the ice, still laughing, still connected by their intertwined hands. Later, in a small, warm coffee shop, sitting side by side in a tight booth sharing a hot chocolate topped with excessive whipped cream, Wendy wiped a bit of cream from the corner of Miles's mouth with her thumb, but instead of pulling her hand away, she stopped, her thumb still touching his lower lip, eyes fixed with an intensity that made his heart stop. Miles turned his face slightly, kissing the tip of her thumb. A gentle touch, almost reverent. He heard her breath catch, saw her pupils dilate. "Miles," she whispered, voice hoarse, "what are we doing?" He took her hand, intertwining their fingers and bringing it to rest over his heart, where she could feel every erratic beat. "I don't know, but I don't want to stop." Wendy leaned in, forehead resting against his, eyes closed. "I'm scared." "Of what?" "That this is too good. That I'm falling too fast. That when you really get to know me, the messy parts, the insecurities, the bad days, you'll realize you made a mistake." Miles used his free hand to lift her chin, forcing her to look into his eyes. "Wendy Walsh, I've already seen you be brutally honest with strangers, steal food from my plate and make me fall on ice on purpose. I've seen you with your family, seen how you love fiercely and without filters. I already know your messy parts. And I'm still here. Still want to be here." A tear rolled down her cheek, and he wiped it away with his thumb before leaning in and kissing the spot where it had fallen. A gentle kiss, an unspoken promise. When they finally left the coffee shop, night had completely fallen over Boston, transforming the city into a fairy tale of lights and snow. They walked slowly, without destination, just wanting to prolong their time together. On the corner of her street, Wendy stopped and turned to him. "Do you want to come up?" Miles knew what she was really asking. It wasn't just about coffee or continuing to talk. It was about crossing a line, about transforming this growing chemistry into something more tangible. "Yes," he answered, without hesitation. "But not today." She blinked, surprised. "No, not because I don't want to. God, Wendy, I want it so badly it hurts." He pulled her close, hands on her waist. "But when it happens, and it will happen, I want it to be perfect. I want time. I want to be able to look at you without rushing, to know you in every way possible. I don't want to rush the most important thing that's ever happened to me." Wendy stared at him for a long moment, and then her face lit up with a smile that was pure light. "You really are different, aren't you? I'm trying to be worthy of you." She kissed him then, not on the cheek this time, but on the lips. A soft, chaste kiss, but loaded with promises of what was to come, And when they pulled apart, both were smiling. 2 weeks passed in a succession of stolen moments and growing anticipation. Each encounter between Miles and Wendy was like adding fuel to a fire that burned increasingly intense, until the tension between them became almost palpable, a living force that pulsed in the ever-shrinking space between their bodies. Miles had planned the evening with the meticulous care he applied to his most important projects, but with a completely new vulnerability. He wanted everything to be perfect, not in a showy or impressive way, but intimate, real. He wanted to create a space where Wendy would feel safe to be completely herself, where they could finally stop containing the desire that had been building like a storm about to break. Snow fell heavily over Boston that Friday night when Wendy rang the doorbell to his apartment. Miles opened the door and for a moment just looked at her, drinking in the sight. She wore a simple grey knit dress that hugged her curves, her hair loose falling in waves over her shoulders, her lips painted that red that drove him slightly crazy. But it was her eyes, those golden eyes that stared at him with a mixture of nervousness and desire, that paralyzed him. "Hi," she said softly, her voice slightly trembling. "Hi," he replied, extending his hand. When she took it, he pulled her inside and into his arms in one fluid motion, hugging her tight, his face buried in her hair. "You look beautiful." "So do you." She pulled back slightly to look at him, dark jeans, white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. "Casual suits you." The apartment was transformed in subtle ways. Candles scattered across surfaces cast a soft, dancing light. A carefully selected jazz playlist played quietly. No romantic clichés, but songs he'd learned she loved. In the kitchen, ingredients for dinner were laid out. He had decided to cook for her, something simple, but made with care. "You cook?" Wendy asked, her eyes scanning the kitchen with evident surprise. "I'm learning. I thought we could cook together, if you want." There was uncertainty in his voice, that vulnerability he only showed her. Wendy's smile was devastating. "I'd love to." They cooked side by side, moving through the kitchen in a dance that was becoming familiar. Miles prepared the risotto with intense concentration, while Wendy made a salad, their bodies constantly bumping. A brush of shoulders here, a graze of hands there. Each contact sent sparks across Miles's skin, warming him from the inside out. Wendy grabbed a bottle of red wine he'd opened to breathe, pouring 2 generous glasses. "What are we toasting to today?" Miles stopped stirring the risotto, turning to face her. The candlelight bathed her in a golden glow, and he felt his chest tighten with the intensity of what he felt. "To courage. Yours, for inviting me to Christmas. Mine, for finally admitting what I'm feeling." Wendy took a step closer, so close he could feel the heat radiating from her. "And what are you feeling, Miles?" He set down the spoon, turned completely to her, his hands finding her waist naturally. "That I'm falling irrevocably, that every moment without you feels incomplete, that you terrify me and complete me at the same time." She set her glass on the counter, her hands rising to rest on his chest, feeling his racing heart beneath her palms. "I'm falling too," she confessed in a whisper, "and it terrifies me, but I can't stop. I don't want you to stop." The kiss, when it finally happened, was different from all the casual touches and shy promises they'd shared. It was deep, urgent, charged with weeks of contained desire. Miles's hands tangled in her hair, pulling her even closer as her mouth opened under his, their tongues meeting in a dance that stole the breath from both their lungs. Wendy moaned against his mouth, her hands gripping his shirt, pulling him against her until there was no space between their bodies. Miles lifted her effortlessly, sitting her on the counter, standing between her legs as he continued to kiss her, as if it were the only thing keeping him alive. "Dinner," she murmured against his lips, but without making any move to pull away. "Can wait," he replied, his voice hoarse, moving his mouth down her neck, savoring her racing pulse, the small, needy sound she made when he found the sensitive spot just below her ear. But then he stopped, pulling back slightly, breathing hard, his hands framing her face. "Wait, I want to do this right. I want to feed you first, make you laugh, talk, until we have no more words. And then—" his eyes darkened, the promise clear. "Then I want to take you to my bedroom and spend all night discovering every part of you." Wendy's eyes glistened, pupils dilated with desire. "You look at me like I'm the only thing that matters," she whispered. Miles rested his forehead against hers, eyes closing for a moment. "Because you are." They finished cooking in a silence charged with anticipation, each movement deliberate, each glance a promise of what was to come. During dinner, sitting side by side on the couch instead of at the formal table, they talked, but the words were punctuated by kisses, by touches that became bolder, more exploratory. Miles traced lazy patterns on her bare arm, watching the goosebumps that followed his touch. Wendy fed him pieces of bread, her fingers brushing his lips in ways that made his eyes darken. The tension grew, delicious and torturous. When the plates were finally forgotten, when the wine was almost gone and the music had changed to something slower and more sensual, Miles stood and extended his hand. "Come with me." Wendy placed her hand in his without hesitation, letting herself be guided down the hallway to his bedroom. He had left more candles burning there, the light soft and intimate. The bed was made with clean sheets that smelled like lavender, and through the large windows, snow continued to fall over the sleeping city. Miles turned to her, taking her hands and bringing them to his lips, kissing each knuckle with a reverence that made her heart squeeze. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low. "We can stop any time." "We can just sleep, Wendy silenced him with a kiss, then pulled back just enough to whisper against his lips. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I want you, Miles. All of you." Something broke inside him with those words, the last defenses crumbling. "You already have me," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Completely." They undressed slowly, between deep kisses and exploratory touches. Miles unbuttoned her dress with slightly trembling fingers, revealing creamy skin he immediately wanted to map with his mouth. Wendy slid his shirt over his shoulders, her hands exploring his muscular chest, scratching lightly and drawing a moan from him. When they were finally skin against skin, Miles laid her gently on the bed, covering her body with his butt, supporting his weight on his elbows. He looked into her eyes, those golden eyes now shining with tears of emotion and desire, and saw his soul reflected there. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, tracing the line of her face with his fingers. "Inside and out. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing you that." They made love with an intensity that surprised them both. It wasn't just physical, though that was overwhelming. It was emotional, spiritual, a connection so deep it felt like their hearts beat in unison. Each touch was worship, each kiss a promise, each shared movement a discovery. Miles memorized every sound she made, every place that made her arch, every way to make her whisper his name like a prayer. Wendy surrendered completely, vulnerable and powerful at the same time, taking him to heights he didn't know existed. When they finally climaxed together, it was with eyes open, gazes locked, fingers intertwined, whispering words that were promises and confessions and vows all at once. Afterward, lying in a tangle of limbs and messy sheets, Miles held Wendy against his chest, one hand lazily stroking her back while the other played with her hair. She traced invisible patterns on his skin, her face nestled in the curve of his neck, smiling. "What are you smiling about?" he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "About how I almost didn't come tonight. I was so nervous I changed clothes 6 times. She laughed softly, "And now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Miles pulled her tighter against him, his heart so full it felt like it would explode. "I love you, Wendy. I know it's early, that maybe I should wait, but She lifted her head, silencing him with a slow, deep kiss. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "I love you so much it scares me." They fell asleep like that, intertwined, hearts beating in perfect sync while the snow continued to fall outside, covering the world in a white blanket and transforming the night into something magical and eternal. The first rays of sun of a new year rose over Florida, painting the sky in pastel tones, soft pink, delicate orange, liquid gold, as Miles woke with Wendy still in his arms. They had traveled to his parents' house 3 days before, a spacious and airy mansion in Palm Beach overlooking the ocean, palm trees swaying gently in the tropical breeze and the constant sound of waves serving as the perfect soundtrack. The trip had been Miles's idea, though he was terrified at the prospect. Introducing Wendy to his parents, formally as the woman he loved, seemed like a monumental step. Not because he doubted her or his feelings, but because his parents represented a different world. Old privilege, rigid expectations, silent but penetrating judgments. But Wendy, being Wendy, had faced it all with a mixture of grace and disarming authenticity that won over even Miles's discerning mother within hours. Miles vividly remembered the moment they stepped out of the rental car, Wendy's modest suitcase beside his too expensive one. She had held his hand, her fingers trembling slightly, the only sign of nervousness, as the front door opened, revealing Eleanor and Thomas Carter. Eleanor, elegant at 62, her greying hair perfectly styled, wearing a white linen dress that probably cost more than Wendy's monthly salary, had descended the steps with the posture of someone born to evaluate and judge. Miles felt Wendy straighten her shoulders, her chin lifting in silent defiance, and he loved her even more in that moment. "Mom, Dad," Miles began, his voice surprisingly steady. "This is Wendy Walsh. Wendy, my parents, Eleanor and Thomas." There was a moment of charged silence where Eleanor looked Wendy up and down, noting the simple but well-chosen dress, the practical shoes, the absence of expensive jewelry. Miles felt anger begin to boil, ready to defend Wendy against any veiled or condescending comment. But then Wendy extended her hand with a genuine smile and said, "It's an honor to meet you. Miles talks about you so much, especially about how you, Eleanor, taught him to appreciate art, and how you, Thomas, took him fishing every summer. Those memories clearly shaped who he is, and I'm grateful for that." Eleanor blinked, clearly disarmed by the sincerity. And then, to Miles's surprise, she smiled, a small but real smile, and took Wendy's hand. "Welcome to our home, dear. Any woman who makes my son smile the way he was smiling when he called to tell us about you is welcome here." The following days unfolded in an unexpected mixture of comfort and discovery. Wendy helped Eleanor in the kitchen, exchanging recipes and family stories, laughing loudly in a way that made the house seem more alive than Miles remembered in years. Thomas, initially reserved, melted completely when Wendy showed genuine interest in his collection of vintage jazz records, spending an entire afternoon listening to stories about each album. But it was on New Year's Eve that everything changed fundamentally. The family had decided on an intimate celebration. No big parties or social events, just the four of them. Eleanor prepared an elaborate dinner while Wendy helped her, and Miles and Thomas set up the back patio with lights and floating candles in the pool that glowed like fallen stars. When night fell and they gathered around the lit pool, the ocean roaring softly beyond the garden, cold champagne in their hands, there was magic in the air that made Miles feel something significant was about to happen. Wendy sat beside him on a lounge chair, barefoot, wearing a light blue summer dress that made her eyes shine like liquid gold under the lights. She held his hand, her thumb tracing lazy circles on his skin, and Miles found himself simply watching her, the way the wind moved her hair, how she laughed at his father's jokes, how she fit perfectly into this world he'd grown up in, but never really belonged to. "You're staring again," she whispered, turning to him with a knowing smile. "Can't help it," he admitted without shame. "You're the most beautiful thing that's ever happened to me." Eleanor, sitting on the other side of the pool, watched the interaction with glistening eyes. She leaned toward Thomas and whispered something Miles couldn't hear, but he saw his father nod with a proud smile. As midnight approached, they gathered at the pool's edge, standing looking at the sky where fireworks would soon begin to burst. Miles held Wendy from behind, arms wrapped around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. "Are you happy?" he murmured against her ear. "More than I imagined possible," she replied, covering his hands with hers. "Your family, they're wonderful, Miles, and they love you so much. They love you too. My mum pulled me aside yesterday and said if I let you get away, she'd disinherit me." Wendy laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "She did not say that." "She did. I swear on my life." He pulled her closer, serious now. "But she doesn't need to worry, because I don't plan on letting you get away. Ever." Wendy's eyes filled with tears. "Miles!" The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Miles held her face between his hands, memorizing every detail, the freckles that dotted her cheeks, the small scar above her eyebrow, the way her lips curved even when she was emotional. 7, 6, 5. "I love you, Wendy Walsh," he said, his voice clear and firm above the sound of the countdown. "In every detail, every laugh, every shared silence. Every moment you make me feel like I finally found my place in the world. 4, 3, 2. I love you so much," she whispered, tears flowing freely now. "You've transformed my entire life." 1. And then he kissed her. Deep, desperate, full of promises and future and everything that couldn't be said with words. Around them, fireworks exploded in the sky, painting the night with vibrant colors, but Miles barely noticed. All that existed was Wendy. The taste of champagne on her lips, the small needy sound she made when he deepened the kiss, the way she clung to him as if he were her anchor. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, laughter mixed with tears, Eleanor and Thomas were clapping, not just for the new year but for them. "Happy New Year," Wendy whispered against his lips. "The first of many," Miles promised. They spent the rest of the night dancing barefoot around the pool, exchanging kisses under the stars, making whispered plans about the future. And when they finally retreated to the guest room they shared, they lay intertwined on the bed, the ocean breeze coming through the open window, and simply held each other. "You know what's crazy?" Wendy murmured in the darkness, her head resting on his chest. "What?" "A month ago I was just a waitress serving people on Christmas Eve, feeling sorry for myself for being alone. And now I'm here, in Florida, being loved by you, accepted by your family, feeling like I've finally found where I belong." Miles kissed the top of her head, his heart so full it hurt. "You always belonged with me, Wendy. I was just waiting for you to show up and show me that." She leaned up, kissing him slowly, tenderly. "I love you. I love you more." Impossible. They fell asleep like that, whispering declarations of love like children competing over who loved more, until sleep finally claimed them, lulled by the sound of the ocean and secure in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious, something that would be worth any risk, any fear, any obstacle the future might bring. 6 months had passed since that Christmas Eve that changed everything. 6 months of daily discoveries, of learning each other's rhythms and idiosyncrasies, of building a life that fit perfectly into spaces that had once seemed empty. Wendy had moved into Miles's apartment 3 months ago. Not because he had pressured her, but because spending nights apart had become physically painful for both of them. Miles woke every morning with her curled beside him, messy hair spread across the pillow, and felt a gratitude so deep that sometimes he had to close his eyes just to process the magnitude of what he felt. She had brought life to his sterile space, plants that actually survived under her care, framed photographs of shared moments, books scattered across every surface, the smell of coffee in the morning, and laughter that echoed through previously silent walls. But Miles knew with a certainty that pulsed in his veins that this wasn't enough. He didn't just want to share an apartment with Wendy, he wanted everything: the shared last name, the eternal commitment, the public promise before everyone who mattered that this woman was his and he was hers forever. The idea of the proposal had germinated in his mind weeks ago, growing and refining until he knew exactly how he wanted to do it. It needed to be perfect, not showy or overly elaborate, but meaningful, intimate, a celebration of how it all began. The Elmstone. Of course it would be there. Where else could it be? Miles spent 2 weeks coordinating with Greg, Wendy's supervisor, who got so emotional about the plan he openly cried when Miles explained. They would close the restaurant for one night, something practically unheard of, and transform the space into the perfect scene. The hardest part was keeping it secret from Wendy, who had an annoyingly accurate sixth sense for when he was hiding something. But Miles invented a story about a special dinner to celebrate 6 months together, and she had accepted with a radiant smile and eyes bright with emotion. Now, sitting in his office on a June afternoon, Miles opened the small navy blue velvet box for the 100th time, looking at the ring he had chosen with such care. It wasn't the biggest or most ostentatious. Wendy would hate that. Instead, it was delicate and timeless, an oval diamond in an antique cut, set in a white gold band with small diamonds intertwined on the sides. Elegant, meaningful, perfect for her. He had included a small engraving inside the band, 1224, where it all began. John, his business partner and best friend, appeared in the office doorway with a knowing smile. "Today's the day, right?" Miles quickly closed the box, his heart racing. "How do you know?" "Dude, you've been compulsively checking that ring for a week, plus you're wearing a suit. You never wear a suit in the office unless it's an important meeting." John came in, closing the door behind him. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Miles admitted, running his hand through his hair. "What if she says no? What if it's too soon? What if—" "Miles, the woman looks at you like you invented the sun. She'll say yes before you finish the sentence." John squeezed his shoulder hard. "You deserve this, you deserve her, and she definitely deserves you." Miles took a deep breath, nodding. "Thanks. Now go propose to that woman before I tell her myself, just from how anxious I am." At 7 in the evening, Miles picked up Wendy at the apartment. She was stunning in an emerald green dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, her hair loose in soft curls, red lips that made him want to cancel all plans and stay home. But he had a mission. "You're suspiciously handsome," Wendy observed in the car, fingers intertwined with his over the center console, "and mysterious. Where are we going?" "You'll see," Miles replied, bringing her hand to his lips. When the car stopped in front of the Elmstone, Wendy looked at him confused. "Here? Miles, I work here. I thought—" "Trust me," he interrupted gently, getting out and opening the door for her. The restaurant looked different. The lights were low, candles flickering on every available surface, creating a golden, intimate glow. But it was empty, completely empty except for a single table in the center of the room. Their table. Where it all began. Wendy brought her hand to her mouth, eyes widening as she processed the scene. The table was covered with an immaculate white tablecloth, tall candles in silver candlesticks, white rose petals delicately scattered, but what made tears instantly spring up were the details. 2 glasses of red wine, exactly like that first night, a basket of still steaming bread, and in the chair that had sat empty 6 months ago, there was now a huge bouquet of white peonies, her favorite flowers. "Miles," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What—" "Come on," he said gently, guiding her to the table. They sat exactly as they had 6 months ago. But now there was no empty chair, no loneliness. There was only them, and the love that had grown from an unlikely encounter on a cold Christmas night. "You remember," Wendy began, tears already streaming, "that night I asked if you were going to spend Christmas alone staring at an empty chair?" "I remember," Miles said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "And I said cheese heals everything." He smiled through his own tears that now threatened to fall. "You did. I was wrong." Wendy held his hands across the table. "It wasn't the cheese that healed. It was you. You healed me in ways I didn't even know I was broken." Miles stood then, coming around the table. Wendy's heart began to beat wildly as she realized what was happening. He knelt beside her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. "So Andy Walsh," he began, his voice breaking but steady. "6 months ago I was sitting at this table completely alone, convinced I'd never find someone who truly saw me. And then you showed up with your Christmas bell earrings and your sharp sarcasm and your eyes that seemed to see straight into my soul." Wendy sobbed, her hands squeezing his. "You took the loneliest night of my life and turned it into the beginning of the best story I could have written. You taught me that love isn't about perfection or impressing someone. It's about showing up. It's about choosing to be present every day. It's about laughing until it hurts and crying when necessary and holding on tight through the storms." He released one of her hands to pull the box from his pocket, opening it to reveal the ring that sparkled under the candlelight. "You turned my life upside down, Wendy. You showed me colors I didn't know existed. You made me feel things I thought I wasn't capable of feeling. And I don't want to spend one more day, one more moment, without knowing you'll be with me until the end." Wendy was openly crying now, her hands shaking violently. "So I'm asking you, here in this place where our story began, before God and the memory of everything we've built, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my best friend? Will you let me love you every day for the rest of our lives?" "Yes!" Wendy shouted before he even finished the sentence, pulling him up and throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Miles spun her in the air, laughing and crying at the same time, before setting her back down and sliding the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled with emotion. It fit perfectly, of course it did. And then he kissed her, kissed her the way he'd dreamed of doing since that first night with all the love and gratitude and promise he carried in his heart. Kissed her like a man who had found his home, his peace, his purpose. When they finally pulled apart, both laughing through tears, Wendy held his face between her hands. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, Miles Carter. You got there first, Wendy. You always got there first." And there, under the flickering candles and the memories of where it all began, they held each other as if nothing else in the world mattered, because truly, nothing else did. The day dawned with an impossibly blue sky, not a single cloud in sight, as if the universe had conspired to ensure everything would be perfect. It was a Saturday in September, almost 9 months after that Christmas Eve that changed everything, and Miles woke in his hotel room with his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Today, he would marry Wendy Walsh. He got up and walked to the window, looking at the botanical garden where the ceremony would take place in a few hours. Rows of white chairs were arranged in a semicircle around an arch covered with white and green flowers. Peonies, hydrangeas, delicate foliage intertwined with fairy lights that would glow when night fell. It was exactly as Wendy had dreamed. Simple, natural, beautiful. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. John entered carrying coffee and a huge smile. "Ready for the big day?" "I was born ready," Miles replied without hesitation. And it was true. There were no doubts, no fears, just an unshakable certainty that he was about to begin the best chapter of his life. Meanwhile, on the other side of the hotel, Wendy sat in front of the mirror while her mother and sister helped with the final preparations. The dress she had chosen was simple but stunning, a flowing design in ivory satin that fell perfectly over her curves, a V neckline that was elegant without being bold, sleeveless to show off her toned arms. Her hair was pulled into a low romantic bun, with loose strands framing her face, and she wore the pearl earrings Eleanor had insisted on lending. "Something borrowed," the tradition said. "You're so beautiful," Carol whispered, hands on her daughter's shoulders, eyes shining with proud tears. "My girl, my baby, look at you." Wendy looked at her own reflection and almost didn't recognize herself, not because of the makeup or the dress, but because of the radiant glow in her eyes, the smile she simply couldn't contain. It was the glow of someone completely, irrevocably happy. "Mom," she began, her voice trembling, "I never thought this was possible. Finding someone who loves me like this, who sees me like this." Carol kissed the top of her head. "You always deserved this, honey. Always. And Miles? He's a good man. A man who values you." Jade appeared in the doorway, wearing a mint-green dress, the color Wendy had chosen for the bridesmaids, holding the bouquet of white peonies and creamy hydrangeas. "It's time." Wendy's heart raced. It was time. The guests were already seated when Wendy arrived at the garden. It wasn't a huge crowd, just the people who really mattered. Carol and Robert in the front row, discreetly wiping tears. Eleanor and Thomas on the other side. Eleanor already using a lace handkerchief for her moist eyes. Friends from both sides, smiling faces and expectant eyes. And at the end of the aisle, under the flower-covered arch, stood Miles. He wore a perfectly tailored light grey suit, white shirt without a tie, casual but elegant, exactly as she had asked. But what took Wendy's breath away wasn't the suit. It was the expression on his face when their eyes met. He was crying. Tears flowed freely down his face as he watched her begin to walk down the aisle to the sound of a string quartet playing a version of 1,000 Years, the song they had danced to for the first time at his parents' house. Wendy wanted to run, wanted to fly to him, throw herself in his arms and never leave, but she forced her feet to maintain a slow, measured pace, savoring each step that brought her closer to the man who had transformed her entire life. When she finally arrived, Robert kissed her cheek and placed her hand in Miles's before sitting down. Miles intertwined his fingers with hers, squeezing hard, his eyes never leaving her face. "Hi," he whispered. "Hi," she replied, smiling through her own tears. The officiant began to speak, but Wendy barely heard the words. All that existed was Miles, the way he looked at her as if she had invented light, how his thumbs traced comforting circles on the back of her hands, how he bit his lower lip, trying to control his emotion. It was time for the vows. Miles went first, pulling a folded paper from his pocket with slightly trembling hands. "Wendy," he began, his voice hoarse but steady, "I spent most of my life building things, companies, software, elaborate plans for the future. I thought I knew what I wanted. Thought I knew what would make me happy. And then you walked into my life with your Christmas bell earrings and your sharp sarcasm and proved I knew nothing." Soft laughter echoed through the guests. "You taught me that happiness isn't something you build or plan. It's something you choose every day. It's waking up next to you and knowing that even on bad days, on difficult days, on days when the world seems to be falling apart, I have you. And that's enough. You're enough. You've always been more than enough." His voice broke and he stopped to take a deep breath. "I promise to choose you every day. I promise to see you, really see you for the rest of my life. I promise to make you laugh when you want to cry. I promise to hold you when the storms come. And I promise to love you, not despite your imperfections, but because of them. Because it's those imperfections that make you perfectly you. And you, Wendy Walsh, are the most perfect thing that's ever happened to me." Wendy was openly crying now, not caring about the makeup that was surely smudged. She wiped her eyes with the back of her free hand before beginning her own vows. "Miles," she began, her voice trembling but clear, "when you walked into my restaurant that Christmas Eve, I thought I was saving you from loneliness. But now I realize it was us who saved each other. You saved me from a life where I had given up believing that someone could love me for what I really am, not for what I could be or should be, but exactly as I am." She squeezed his hands tighter. "You taught me that I'm worthy of gentle love, of patience, of someone who shows up every day without needing reminders or demands. You taught me to fly, Miles, to believe in myself in ways I never imagined possible, and I promise to give that back to you every day for the rest of our lives." Her voice softened, becoming almost a whisper, but everyone heard in the reverent quiet of the garden. "I promise to be your partner, your safe harbor, your biggest supporter. I promise to challenge you when you need it and comfort you when the world is too harsh. I promise to never stop stealing food from your plate, teasing you until you show that crooked smile I love so much, reminding you every day how extraordinary you are. Because you are, Miles, you're extraordinary. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life grateful that you chose to see me that night." The officiant could barely finish the ceremony through his own tears. "By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Miles, you may kiss your—" But Miles was already pulling Wendy into his arms, kissing her with an intensity that made the guests explode in applause and whistles. It was a kiss that contained everything. All the promises made, all the fears overcome, all the love that had grown from an unlikely encounter on a cold night into something eternal and unshakable. When they finally pulled apart, both laughing and crying, Miles rested his forehead against hers. "Hello, Mrs. Carter," he whispered. "Hello, husband," she replied, and the word felt magical. The reception was a celebration of pure joy. They danced their first dance under fairy lights as the sun set, painting the sky in pink and gold tones. Miles held Wendy close, whispering words of love as they slowly spun, lost in each other. Carol danced with Miles, whispering, "Take care of my girl," through happy tears. Thomas danced with Wendy, saying, "Officially welcome to the family, daughter." Eleanor hugged Wendy so tight she could barely breathe, murmuring, "Thank you for making him happy." Jade gave a hilarious speech about all of Wendy's disastrous dates, ending with, "And then she found Miles, who proved it was worth waiting through all those idiots." John made a moving toast about friendship and finding the right person. And Carol couldn't finish her speech without dissolving into happy sobs. But the most magical moment came late that night, when most of the guests had already left, and Miles and Wendy were alone in the garden under a starry sky. They sat on the grass, Wendy nestled between his legs, the dress spread around them in a sea of satin. "Do you regret it?" Miles asked playfully, kissing the top of her head. "What? Marrying the man of my dreams? Never." Wendy turned her head to look at him. "Do you? My only regret is not meeting you sooner, not having more time with you." He took her left hand, looking at the wedding band that now accompanied the engagement ring. "But then I realize we met exactly when we should have. At the right time. In the right way." Wendy turned completely, climbing onto his lap and wrapping her arms around his neck. "I love you, Miles Carter. I love you more, Wendy Carter." And there, under the stars, in the place where they had sworn eternal love, they kissed as husband and wife, not just for the first time, but as a promise of countless future kisses, countless shared dawns, countless moments of joy and challenges overcome together. Because sometimes the best stories begin in loneliness, in empty chairs, in cancelled dates, and they end with two souls finding exactly what they didn't know they were looking for: each other, forever. In the end, true love didn't arrive wrapped in perfection. It came on a cold Christmas night, through an empty chair and a waitress brave enough to see beyond appearances. Miles and Wendy proved that sometimes the right person shows up exactly when we stop looking, when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to be seen. They transformed loneliness into belonging, fear into courage, and a chance encounter into a love for a lifetime. Because deep down we're all looking for the same thing: someone who chooses us, who stays, who loves us not despite who we are, but exactly because of it. And maybe the real magic isn't in finding the perfect person, but in finding someone who makes our heart feel like it's finally come home. And you? Are you allowing yourself to be seen? Are you choosing to show up, even when it's scary? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the super thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing stories that move you.